Do you want to perfect and memorize a killer flop c-bet strategy? Here's my advice. Don't. So on Run It Once, there's a PLO solver tool called Vision, which has a function called Streak. The way that Streak works is you can either pick a spot or just pick a street. So for example, facing flop c-bets in single raise pots, and it will feed you hands. You have 15 seconds to choose an action, and it tells you whether you're right or wrong. And then you accumulate the longest streak possible without getting an answer wrong. And Streak has leaderboards. So one day I was bored and I thought, I have studied a lot of heads up PLO. They have separate features for heads up and six max. I thought, I'm going to try today to crack some of these leaderboards and see how I can do. So I spent a lot of time going through, different streets. Long story short, I realized that I couldn't crack into the top few of these lists. I expected to have a good chance to, first of all, because I study a fair amount. I don't know exactly who these people are. They're just screen names, but I'm pretty sure none of them would want to play against me that heads up PLO. So I figured if my overall skill is better than theirs, and I have studied with this tool quite a bit, I could compete very well. Then it turns out that I couldn't. And there are two reasons for that. The first reason is that when I study, I like to take a solver strategy and simplify it so that it's one I can more easily execute at the table. So for example, single raise pot, I check call a continuation bet, turn comes out, whatever it may be. I never have a leading range. I never lead turn, no matter what the card is, no matter what the flop was, no matter what the turn card is. Some players opt to have leads there. Vision and solvers in general do have leads there, but I believe they add such little EV and they complicate my own strategy and my own studying and my ability to execute my strategy. And when you try to execute a more complicated strategy, it's more likely that you're going to have a huge hole somewhere in your game. And if your opponent figures it out, they can take advantage. The second reason is just that despite having studied heads up PLO a lot, these people had obviously studied more than I have. Again, I'm making assumptions, but why is it that these people who could score much higher in this leaderboard competition, why can't they beat me in heads up PLO? The reason is that getting the perfect flop c-bet strategy is just not that important. And what's really important in poker is understanding the concepts behind optimal play. Solvers don't just think about how to play an individual spot and then get to a new spot and they think, okay, how do I play this individual spot? Well, they might kind of do that, but programmatically. But the way that the strategy comes together, they're really accounting for every street. They're thinking forwards and backwards. With AI, whether it be solver or otherwise, you don't get to see the thought process because there is no thought process. It's just calculating something. And so learning from a solver, it's kind of the opposite of learning from a teacher, where a teacher will walk you through, okay, so what do you think about this? Oh, why is that? Okay, so what do you think that means about this? And they walk you through the thought process and then you give them the answer. The solver does the opposite. It just tells you the answer and it doesn't tell you why. And so your job when you're studying solvers is to fill in the blanks there. Because if all you have is the answers and no context, you're not going to be able to apply those answers when you're trying to figure them out on your own, because you have a human mind. You have to go through a human thought process. So get the answers from the solver and then try to connect the dots, see why it might have done what it did. Now, there are a lot of hands that show up in your flop c-betting range. Let's use a Hold'em example, for example, where on a board of 10-8-3, 2 spades, you might do a lot of c-betting with a hand like 9-4 with the 9 of spades. Now, that hand has really low equity, but on a run out of, jack of spades, king, it's going to have a hand that can triple barrel, because if you're only betting draws, when a board runs out in a certain way, you have no air left to bluff with. So what are you going to bluff with? So part of what a solver does is it puts hands in there that have blockers to hands that you want to represent later. It barrels off with them when those hit, sometimes when they don't hit too. Because actually your draws that you bet flop with and turn with end up being worse river bluffs because they block your opponent having those draws that you want them to fold. So a lot of times these hands that are really weak bet flop because of certain blocker effects, and then they very often continue betting, well, depending on the turn card and the river card. If you bet these hands on the flop and you don't bet them later, your flop bet is a clear mistake. You're losing a lot of money with your flop bet. Some would say, no, you're losing money with your lack of turn and river bet, and technically you're right, and you are. But you're also losing money with your flop bet because this is a really low equity hand. Kind of the only reason it shows up in the betting range is that it can be still air on a lot of draw completing runouts. But if you're not going to bluff with it on those draw completing runouts, then it's just a really weak hand that you're putting in money with. You don't want to start bluffs with hands that can only, more or less, only become bluffs. And so getting the flop c-bet strategy absolutely perfect doesn't help you if you don't play it absolutely perfectly on the turn and perfectly on the river, or near perfectly on the turn and river. What's really important in poker is understanding the concepts behind what optimal strategy is, why a solver is betting these hands, what it can value bet across 2 streets, across 3 streets, what make the best bluffs, what attributes do hands have that make them good bluffs, what hands that are pretty good check back and why. Are they pot controlling? Do they give you good board coverage on certain turns for your check back range? Is it, if you don't make those checkbacks, your opponent would get to do X, Y, and Z to take advantage? There are so many things that you need to consider and think about that learning specific c-bet strategy, it just kind of doesn't matter. What matters is that you can think through every situation that comes with your human mind, not a computer, because you don't get to bring that solver with you and consult it at every point. So the thing is, you can perfect pre-flop strategy. You can just memorize what hands to play pre-flop, and you can probably get really, really close to a flop c-bet strategy. But given how many flops and then turn combinations, how many different things that can happen throughout a hand, you just have no chance of memorizing anywhere close to a turn strategy and a river strategy, especially once you take into account it's not always going to go check, bet, call, check, bet, call. Sometimes it'll go check, bet, raise. Sometimes it'll go check, bet, call, check, check on the turn, and the river is whatever the river brings. Trying to build your strategy through memorization, I believe, is just kind of a hopeless effort. Sure, memorize pre-flop ranges, that's good. For the most part, your post-flop leaks will not impact what you can play pre-flop too much. They will a little bit, but memorize pre-flop, fine. Get a good idea of what hands bet flop and for what sizing, and that's important. But what's more important is understanding the concept between what is the solver trying to do here with small bets? What's it trying to do with big bets? Why on this board is it betting big and on this board it's betting small? What are these hands that can value bet 2 streets and check back river? What are these hands that can value bet 3 streets? What prefers to go bet, flop, check, turn, bet river? What turn cards change the sizing that I use or the betting frequency that I use drastically? There are so many of these factors to think about. Getting this is already a near monumental task. Actually trying to memorize solver outputs is that times 1,000. And so unless you have a photographic memory, and even which, I don't know any player who's memorized solver strategy or come anywhere close to it. Hopefully what you take away from this is not don't study. You absolutely should study if you want to improve. Studying is a fantastic way to improve, but the way that you should study is not through memorization. It's through taking solver outputs, applying human logic so that you can internalize it, you can digest it. And when you find yourself in any spot, you can go through your human thought process and try to figure out your best guess as to what to do there. I don't know what a solver would do in every spot in heads up PLO, but I know how to think through every spot in PLO like a solver so that when I do find myself in a very strange spot, I'm going to get close enough so I'm not going to lose much EV. Thank you for watching. Hopefully that was helpful for you. I'm making a big push right now to make more and more videos. So if you like this, please let me know. Let me know what you'd like to see more of. And please consider subscribing to the channel so that you don't miss those videos.